Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, I'm here with Cindy Yip. Cindy is a professional engineer and doctoral graduate from the University of Toronto. Cindy is also the sole caregiver for her father, who is living with multiple heart conditions. She is a passionate patient advocate, a co-founder of Find ACHD, which stands for Adult Congenital Heart Disease, and she is an immigrant, which I think is important to point out, Cindy, because we talk so often about the intersection of culture and caregiving and language and things like that on the OCO podcast. So we're definitely going to dive into that with you today. And we thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for inviting me.
And, you know, a little more context, the reason we're here for Time to Talk is because we really want to create a space where caregivers like yourself can find someone that they can connect to, relate to, learn a little bit, sometimes often find resources, perhaps, like Find ACHD. So we'll learn more about that today. And we also want to learn about the importance of diverse health needs and caregiving. So let's start with tell us a little bit about your dad and your journey with caregiving and how did that begin?
Well, I would say it began at birth. I really have shared my caregiving responsibility with my mother most of my life. This is because my father developed a heart problem called rheumatic heart disease when he was a child. So literally growing up, I know my father was the one in the household with a heart problem as a little kid. And very memorable, growing up one day when I was in high school, he collapsed at work. And I think that was the first time as a child I realized how serious his heart problem was. And then sometimes later, he had his first open heart surgery to replace his mitral valve with a mechanical heart valve. And that was when he was in his 40s, and I was a teenager, right? Rebellious teenager, not really taking things seriously, trying to help out here and there. So it really struck me how critical, his health condition was at that point. All those years growing up, just sharing that responsibility with my mother. But what I really feel it was 6 years ago when my mother passed away suddenly. Okay. And that's when I became my father's sole caregiver full time. We have no other family member here in Canada. We moved here in the 90s, and it's really just the three of us as a family. So my mother passed away. Everything fell on me. And just to add salt to the injury, I would say 3 years after that, after my mother passed away, the COVID pandemic hit us. And on top of that, one day suddenly I had to rush my father to the emergency room just to find out that his mechanical valve, which at that point has been 20 years old, since the first open heart surgery he had, needed a replacement right in the peak of the pandemic. So luckily, he was at that point in his 60s. Luckily, he's a tough man and he bounced back from his second open heart surgery and is doing relatively well, even though he is now living with a mitral valve disorder, a dilated aorta, atrial fibrillation, and heart failure, a very complex heart problem. And while dealing with all that, I am navigating through my career in the middle of a young professionals, I would still say young in quotations, and trying to navigate, how to build my career while taking on this full-time work of taking care of my father and walking him through in every single step, in this recovery from his second heart surgery just as little as 3 years ago. So that's really a lot of, ups and downs, a lot of unexpected, a lot of adapting to life as it throws things at you. And I would say a lot of juggling and trying to do things creatively along the way.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I get a really good picture of what your journey has been like. And, to start out, you have a very busy and impressive career on your own. So I can imagine that's a lot to juggle with. But we talk about sort of almost 3 or 4 different stages of your caregiving journey. You mentioned that you, to a certain extent, have always been aware that you are a caregiver to your father. However, when you were a teenager and that incident happened, that was sort of the first step of sort of taking on more or being more aware of your role as a caregiver. And then later on, and when your mother passed away, that sort of, added to your responsibilities. And then, of course, what happened with needing his valve replaced and additional surgery during COVID, that's a whole different layer as well. So it's a lot. And I would love to know how you felt at those stages, how caregiving changed your life, and what that changed in terms of your day to day.
I would say, to no surprise, it really shaped my life, right? In a personal level as well as a professional level. Um, I would say on the day to day, I would bucket it into 3 category in a way. On a good day, when my father's health is relatively stable, I usually can check on him via work, remotely, or give him a call or give him a text message here and there. I've taught him how to use technology, which is very helpful to stay connected with him while having a full-time job. And then come home after work and make him dinner and measure his blood pressure and oxygen level and fill his pill box for the next day and get things ready. That's a good day to me. It's still a handful. Literally, there is no downtime. And trying to squeeze some time for myself it really happened either during my commute to work or a little bit of time before bed. Um, when he has medical appointment, I always say those are more involved days, right? They're still very manageable in many ways because you mentally prepare, the appointment is coming, you are mentally preparing yourself that potentially there will be good news, not so great news, or bad news, depending on the situation. But at least I would say those are the manage mentally, prepare, you physically plan for it type of situation. That is the second bucket. And I've always managed to take time off from work and make sure that the healthcare teams include me as a caregiver in all the communications. I really want to stress this last part, right? Because it's not just about being there with him in the appointment. It's about advocating for my father as a patient, advocating for my own caregiver right. And as you mentioned, being an immigrant, there's a lot of cultural language barrier, and I can't say how important it is to be there and advocate and stress and explain it to the healthcare team why my presence with him and in the appointment, as well as communicating with me or include me as part of the communication, is very important, because so that I can continue that care and make sure that he is compliant with his medication, he is compliant to his treatment plan as the moment he leaves the appointment. I always say the third bucket is what I call the not so good day. I wouldn't call them bad day. They are the one that will throw you a curveball. You don't plan for it. You're physically or mentally not prepared for it in any capacity. So I remember, there have been times when I needed to hop on an ambulance and rush him to the emergency room in the middle of a work day and really literally just have to drop everything. I would say, you asked about how this 3 bucket of caregiving experience changes me. I think it just made me realize how important caregiving is, and it also made me realize that the contribution of a caregiver isn't just limited to my father or my own family, but it also, we're a very important integral part of the healthcare team, and a very important role that we can play to help this already overloaded healthcare system. And we can all do that by being a vocal advocate in a very constructive way, right? Help our healthcare team understand what our needs are, what are the gaps, what's not working, what's working well as well, help with being a translator, help with being a navigator. And then at times, I am literally the home nurse, right? Administrating medication. And if you really step back and think about it, it really changed my perspective of, I'm not just a daughter or, a family member. I am actually part of the healthcare team as a caregiver to ensure that the right patient resource, medications, and care are provided to my father, and also to ensure that all the hard work that doctors and nurses and health team has provided doesn't go to waste. It really does come to the optimal outcome for the patient, like my father.
Our online support group offers a community of fellow caregivers who understand the challenges and rewards of your role. Connect with trained peer support group facilitators with firsthand experience as caregivers and share your concerns and successes in a safe and supportive environment. Join us today and experience the power of community. For more information, call 1-833-416-2273. That's 1-833-416-CARE. And now, back to our episode.
I love how you have expressed all of that, how important, and I want all of the caregivers listening to understand, because again, you're placing the importance on advocating for the person that you're caregiving for is so important, but how caregivers are an integral and equal partner in the healthcare process. And as you mentioned, for our healthcare system as well, how important that they are. So thank you for that, because you've just said it so beautifully. And I think everybody should understand that that role is so important in the whole healthcare ecosystem, and obviously so critically important to our loved ones as well. On top of all of that, we talked about in the beginning how you are a co-founder of Find ACHD. Can you tell us a little bit about the collaborative and the work that you do with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you hear that and as you have emphasized that, one thing I do realize from my journey is caregiver can do a lot to give back to our community, right? Whether it's being an integral part of the healthcare system, reducing the burden of, our already overload healthcare provider, or being a very caring family member. So I also noticed along the journey that a lot of individuals living with heart problems are often lost to regular follow-up with expert cardiac health professionals. So usually a cardiac crisis prompts the patient to seek help in the emergency room when it's often too late to reverse the damage. I was very lucky that, my dad was able to repair for the second time his broken heart valve, but that may not be the case for all, right? So, and then the other part on top of that is, as immigrants, it's not easy to find those expert cardiac health professional to connect to seamlessly the moment you arrive in Canada. So for example, it took my father over about a decade after moving to Canada until he was able to find a cardiologist to follow up with him regularly. And I was only able to do that because he ended up in the emergency room, as I mentioned before, like many other individuals with heart problems. So similarly, I would say this is not unique to my father, because I also know that every 3 in 4 individuals living with adult congenital heart disease are unaware that there are expert cardiac care in the system that they can tap into as a resource. I mean, something that was really shocking to me as I'm going through this journey, that can you believe only 1 in 4 individuals living with congenital heart disease are being regularly cared for by expert cardiac health professionals? And we pride ourselves for how great our system is. And it is great. It just, there are experts that we can tap into. So it's really shocking. So what I decided to do is why don't I take all this learning observation in my caregiving journey and partner with another patient, Sheila Ross, who is living with adult congenital heart disease and co-founded what we call Find ACHD. And our vision is really to reach every adult congenital heart disease patient to achieve the best possible care so that we leave no one behind. And this group is powered by a passionate group of volunteers of different healthcare professionals. We got general practice, physicians, family physicians, nurses, expert cardiac professionals, health teams, patients, and caregiver. And really the purpose here is to bring all this passionate group together to solve the problem, because I think together we are stronger as patients, healthcare providers, and caregiver, and also to empower how we as caregiver can help each other. And it's a very important piece. For example, by coming together, we were able to develop multi-language pamphlets for patients during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and explained what COVID-19 vaccine is about and what heart disease patients need to be aware of in over 6 different languages.
Wow.
And just like that, right? So I think for listeners out there who want to get involved, who want to learn more about us or learn about how caregivers can give back to the community and help each other, you can follow us on Twitter, or X as what people call it now, at FindACHD. Or you can email us at findacxd@gmail.com, and we are always looking to help others like us. And as I mentioned, we are stronger together.
Absolutely. This is such an important resource that you're providing for other caregivers and for patients as well, because I know it's so hard when you begin a caregiving journey, or perhaps, as you mentioned, when you come to a new place, a new country, and you're trying to find those resources. There's a lot to unravel, and it's so generous of you in the midst of your very busy life to also provide that as a resource and a collective for people to go to. But on that point, you have your life as well. You have your career, you have all these things. How do you juggle having a personal identity that is separate from being a caregiver?
Yeah, it's not easy. I have to be honest. I mean, at times my brain always goes through this juggling of, am I a daughter now, or a caregiver, or a working professional, or a partner, at home supporting, my partner. And it's very challenging. And I think what really helped me is I often remind myself, or I have this little inside voice and ask myself, which role am I taking on right now at this moment? For example, when I cook dinner for my father every night as a way to monitor, his diet, I'm a caring daughter, right?
Mhm.
I'll be a little bit more gentle. I can be a little bit more playful. But when I'm, managing his medications and ensuring that, his salt intake is minimum to avoid any undesirable fluid retention that can put strain on his heart, then I'm no longer just a caring daughter. I am a caregiver, and I need to be very strict to my own father, even if it means that I had to give him orders that he may not like,
Mhm.
right? So I think it's really about taking that little pause and ask me, what am I doing this for? And who am I doing this for? And then put on that different hat. And then essentially, to me, it's like you're in a musical show and you are this one person who play many different characters, and which costume you're putting on at that moment, and really wear that different persona so that you can actually achieve what you're trying to achieve for that given moment, is how I try to remind myself, what kind of personal identity I need to be. And I would say at the end of the day, I think I'm very lucky because my career interest and passion aligns with my personal day-to-day caregiving duties. So I have the, opportunity and lucky to pursue a career where I'm always working in the healthcare area and advancing patient outcome or care. So I think in a way that makes it a little bit easier for me because there is perfect alignment between my passion and my professional interests.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that, because that is a great thing as a young professional to have that alignment between your career and also your the responsibilities that you take on as a caregiver. But I mean, you're a young professional. You've accomplished so much. You're a doctoral graduate from the University of Toronto. You're a professional engineer. Can you tell us a little bit how caregiving has affected your career, or has it perhaps sort of maybe leading from what you just said, has it informed your career to a certain extent?
I think it definitely has informed my career. I would say caregiving shaped my career. Having lived through my father's first mitral valve replacement with a mechanical valve, I immediately become very interested in the marriage between biology and engineering. So to no surprise, I went into biomedical engineering as my training. And then I went on to complete a doctoral degree in heart valve research in hope to find a fix for my father.
Wow.
And then my entire career evolves around improving patient outcome one way or another. I have not left the healthcare industries. I currently work for a pharmaceutical company. Before I work for a point of care diagnostic company. And then previously I worked for a not-for-profit organization to advocate for cardiovascular disease. So I have always learned also in my very early on in my caregiving journey, and I think it's a blessing that I was exposed to it so early in my teenager years, that I need to be very realistic and flexible and creative on how I approach my career. So, for example, it is very common as an expectation to travel abroad overseas to complete a postdoctoral fellowship after doing your doctoral training. And that was right out by far not a possibility for me because I needed to stay here in Toronto to care for my father. So I had to find a career opportunities locally and go against the grain. And I know I shock a lot of people around me when I did that decision. But in fact, I was willing to take on something that is completely different. And my first job was actually in marketing research, making cold calls and not at the bench doing science, right? And it's a job that uses all my transferable skill sets that I've learned during my academic training, but it took me away from what I was primarily trained for. And it wasn't until 3 years after that I was able to then find a job to return to doing science at the bench. Again, developing medical device for diagnosis of various infectious disease and personalized medicines to ensure that medication is prescribed best for the individual genetic profile. So I would say what really helped me is to know what my transferable skills are and then applied it to what I'm very passionate for, which is patient care and improving patient outcome, and then know how to be adaptive along the way, but don't lose your dream, because my dream at the end of the day was to find solutions for patients in one way or another. And I never gave up, not because I went into marketing and do cold call at the beginning, means that I have to give up science altogether. In fact, I found my way and returned back to the bench and did many great years of science work continuously after. So I think not giving up, just be adaptive and figuring out how each step can contribute to either using my transferable skill or picking up new transferable skill has been very helpful.
That's not only great career advice for caregivers, but for everyone, really, about being adaptable and figuring out a way. You sound like you're handling all this incredibly well, but we all need support. So what supports have you used to sort of manage, or to definitely manage, your career and your caregiving responsibilities for your father?
Definitely, I think there were a lot of support along the way, right? The obvious ones are all my family and friends. And by family, I mean my extended family, from my partner's side, because I don't have any immediate family
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
And also all my colleagues. And I would say what makes it, very useful was I was very proactive in looking for support in a very creative way. First of all, I would say very early in my career, I've networked a lot in my professional network, and really trying to meet people who are going through similar things in my career, who are
Mm.
also young professionals at the time, and try to not only learn some tips and tricks from them on how to navigate. Like, for example, for me, when I finished my doctoral degree, it was a gold standard to go and leave the city you did your doctoral degree, right? So I went around and asked, what if you can't do that? What do other people do? And it taught me some tips and tricks on, how you can still navigate a very fulfilling
Mhm.
career without having to leave the country and relocate. But I think what's more important is through this networking, it also constantly reminds me that I'm not alone. I think recognizing that is very helpful. It gives me comfort. It gives me a lot of reassurance and a peace of mind. Um, and it also helped me to, keep going. And that's how, I can always, have that message at the back of my mind, this may not be the ideal path I want to be on right now, but don't give up the dream. You know where is your goal and you will get there eventually. Um, so I would say all that, in addition to, not giving up my dream and reinforcing that message for myself, it also helped me build a lot more confidence throughout my career
Mm.
journey. Um, at the beginning, I was very shy of sharing with my employer my personal situations as a caregiver. I was worried that by letting them know, I may be given an assignment that are less important, or I may not be, giving, interesting projects. But as I grow more confident in my career, I become more comfortable and learned how to constructively have those conversations, so that I can be more proactive in seeking help from my employer. And by letting them know my personal situation or awareness of my caregiving responsibility in addition to my day job, I was able to make work arrangement with them that is mutually beneficial for both
Mhm.
myself and my employer. And I think it was, I wish I know that earlier, or I wish I had that confidence earlier, because I think that was very helpful and it really opened up a lot of opportunities for me to juggle my career and the home responsibility and caregiver responsibility with much lower level of stress. Um, and I would say, in addition to all that, at the time of extreme high stress, I have been very lucky and been able to lean on employee assistance program
Mm.
that is offered by my employer, which provide me a lot of the much needed mental health support, right? Which is not something I expect from my manager per se, but definitely I can have those private conversation and confidential conversation through counselors offered in the employee assistance program. And it really just helped me get over the hump or get over those low points in my caregiver journey. And so those has been very good support. And I would say sometimes those are not often advertised or talked about in your workplace, right? So um, maybe just, for the listener out there, just ask a simple question with your human resource staff and just ask, do you offer employee assistance program? And you may be surprised, the answer could be yes, and they will connect you to the right person and get you the much needed help without additional costs and without additional going out of the way, because usually they are provided through work, and then that way you can work it within your schedule of your everyday job. So those have been extremely helpful in terms of managing my career and my caregiving responsibilities.
You've given us two really great pieces of advice there. One, to have the courage to go to your employer and talk about your situation and find ways to, offer a solution, offer the potential for, working on being a caregiver and your work that is mutually beneficial for yourself and your employer, being open and honest about that, but then also using the resources that are available to you with your employee assistant program, if you have it, and you should definitely ask if that's available to you. Is there any other advice that you would give another working caregiver who is trying to build their career and caregive at the same time?
I would say one thing that if there's one thing I would like the listener to take away from this is don't give up your career dream. Um, I think with some flexibility and a bit of proactive planning, it is possible to care for a loved one and still pursue a very fulfilling, meaningful career.
Mhm.
Your path may not be as direct as some others, um, but you can still get there. And you just need to be a little bit more creative along the way and a little bit more patient, because there are going to be days that your hands are so full and you need to know to say, no, I can't take on anymore. As I have mentioned earlier, I left research for 3 years, but with some determination, I managed to find my way back to a career in science. I have had changed jobs. Um, Actually, when I found out my dad needed his second open heart surgery, um, I had to change jobs so that I can step back a little bit instead of a very demanding global role, which required me to work around the clock. I had to, change to a less demanding job that is more geared to Canadian work hours
Mhm.
and a less global work, just so that I can have a little bit more time to take care of my father along his recovery journey. As I go through the second open heart surgery with him alone by myself without my mother, right? So you
Mhm.
make choices in your career to adjust to the needs and be flexible, and you will get there. Don't give up your career dream.
That's great advice.
Over a third of caregivers use their personal finances and savings to pay for the needs of the person they care for. Financial hardships are common when it comes to being a caregiver. Luckily, there is financial support for caregivers through government agencies and community organizations. As a caregiver, you may be eligible for caregiver benefits and leave. The Ontario Caregiver Organization has made a list of financial support and grants. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca for more information. Now, back to our episode.
We talked about the fact that you and your family moved here to Canada in the 90s, and you also mentioned how English is not your first language. So that really plays into the entire process and experience of being a caregiver here in Ontario and in being a patient here in Ontario. So let's talk about, were there any challenges and barriers that you faced as someone whose language or whose first language wasn't English?
Oh gosh, there are just so many. I will try to highlight a few, and definitely this may call for another specific podcast on this
Sure, you know what?
topic.
It just might. It's an important
Uh,
conversation.
But I would say first that come to my mind is the lack of culturally relevant patient resource. I think it's one thing to have patient resource in a particular language, and it's another thing that those resources are written in a culturally relevant way. Um, and you can only do that by working with ethnic groups to co-develop those resources. I think that's a very important piece, and that's really related to as caregiver, I can be giving back to the community, and I do highly encourage that if there it's a little bit of moments as a caregiver who are listening to this, try to reach out to your local hospital or clinics and patient advocacy group and see if they need help, or OCO, right? See if they need help, because I think not only it will give you a nice little break away from all your stressful responsibility as a caregiver, it will be extremely helpful to have the opportunity to provide a cultural perspective. I would say secondly is that many caregivers may not be aware of their right and know to ask the healthcare teams to include them in all communications. I have been shooed away by many doctors and nurses and healthcare teams, not because of any ill intention, right? They just didn't know. They thought my dad is nodding. He seems to speak some broken English, right? And then like, he seems to be fine. He seems to be understanding. Little do they know he's probably just only nodding because he think that it's a polite thing to do to acknowledge. So I've been told many times you can come into this. You know your dad seems to speak fine. We don't need you, right? And you know I would explain and take the time. Look, I am an essential caregiver. I have my right to be here. He doesn't understand fully all the English, and explain to them that he may be giving you certain body gesture to suggest that he may understand what you're saying, but in fact he doesn't. So really taking the time to explain the situation with the healthcare teams, and eventually they will listen to you. May not be the first or second time, but by the third time around, they will come around to you. And if not, you try to find another healthcare members, providers to explain that to their colleagues, and eventually that message will get through. And then once they realize all the benefits that come to having you in the appointments and in all the communication, then they will continue to do so. It's a bit of a positive uh, encouragement, right, to our healthcare teams. And I would say third would be not knowing you or your family member can request an interpreter prior to your medical appointment, and ask your healthcare provider to write down key points, so that even if you don't understand what is going on or what information is being shared with you, you can take the information home for someone who can understand English fluently and explain it to you in your native language in a culturally relevant ways. Like, for example, UHN has a fully funded, a program to bring in interpreter, right? And a lot of patients don't know to ask about that in advance. So those are things that you can ask the healthcare teams when they schedule the appointment, to see if there are interpreter available. If it is, what is the process to have an interpreter in an appointment? If not, can the doctor write down in very clear, legible handwriting on the paper, some of the key points for you to take home? And lastly, most caregiver and patient are not comfortable to politely ask to be referred to another healthcare providers who can fluently speak the language and understand the culture. I think a lot of us will shy away, or will feel that, oh my gosh, my healthcare team is going to feel offended because, there must be something wrong with them. I want a different doctor or nurse. But in fact, if you ask politely, they're having to refer you to someone else who can better care for you, because it's in their best interest to provide the optimal care to the patients. So I did exactly that for my father. Initially, he was seeing a cardiologist who only speak English, and there was a lot of loss in translations, a lot of like cultural gaps. So I politely asked the cardiologist, can we transfer him to another doctor, so that they understand the cultural aspect, so that he can better follow the treatment, and have a more open relationship with the doctor. And that has been tremendously helpful, because now, instead of going to the appointment very nervous, uh, and very much like feeling like he's being interrogated, he now can go to his cardiologist for follow-up, and joke about things, and tell his little stories. And it's good not only for his heart, it's also good for his cognitive and mental health as well, right? So I think those are some of the challenges and barriers that one face when the language isn't English, isn't the first language, and we're not native here. But there is some workaround that I would say can be quite tangible and manageable to provide some immediate relief or solutions.
Well, and that's the thing. I actually was going to ask you, what are the solutions to these challenges? But you've so wonderfully given us a solution to each challenge, I think, that you faced. And I love the fact that you've talked about language and culture, because they work together. It's not just about translating something into English. There are nuances of culture that can get lost in translation, as you mentioned. And that piece of well-being, the fact, like you said, that your father could maybe joke around a bit or have cultural references with someone or feel a little bit more understood, it is really a wonderful thing. And we're such, our multiculturalism here in Ontario, in terms of just the broad range of people that are here and the cultures and languages that are represented, it does make sense that we should be able to have those resources that fit everybody's needs. Do you think there are anything other than what you've talked about in terms of solution, anything else that needs to be done to overcome this particular challenge?
I think one thing I was stressed, and I think I use this word a lot, is co-create a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress how important it is as caregivers to work with trusted patient organizations such as, Heart Life Foundation or Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, Fund H60, and organization like OCO, right? Like, share your story, take the time to co-create culturally relevant patient resource. And through those networking and through those conversation, we learned a lot. Through this conversation, I'm also learning a lot from you, Michelle, right, on what
Thank you.
resonate. And I think secondly is also open up the opportunity to advocate for you and your family, right? I think it's one thing to advocate one-on-one with my father's cardiologist and family physician and dentist about his conditions and care. But I think it's another level to advocate with, established trusted organizations, like OCO and other places. And there are ways, as you do more and more of that, as caregiver, we also learn how to communicate more constructively and provide feedback to our healthcare system and teams to co-create solutions together for better patient care. I think that is a very important piece. Is either it's not about us. Yeah, it is frustrating. It is stressful. It is tiring. There are days that I feel like I might not be able to make it, and I may be bursting home in tears. But at the same time, there are days like this that, I can take a few minutes out of my workday to share back, and it's very fulfilling. It's very rewarding, and hopefully, am sharing some thoughts and experience that will be useful to someone out there like me.
That's really what we're hoping to do today, because someone out there that's going to be listening to the podcast will find hopefully something in your journey that resonates with them, that perhaps mirrors something that they've gone through. And you've provided us with so many great ideas for supports and resources. And you've co-founded a support and resource yourself with Find ACHD. So that's additionally so wonderful. I wanted to ask before we finish, is there anything else? I mean, you've given us so much, but is there anything else that you want other caregivers who may be listening to this episode to walk away with?
I would say no matter how much support you have, um, feeling stress and fatigue are unavoidable along the way of caregiving. And it's important to make time for those feelings. I used to push them away. I used to try to, work extra hours to as a coping mechanism to forget about it. And at the end of the day, it does catch up to you. So I would say, make time for those feelings. It's okay that you may not be feeling 100% every day, every moment. And also recognize that there are a lot of free tools out there and resources out there that can provide those mental health support. For example, there is the mental health playbook for business leaders, offered by Kim Inch, right, which are research scientifically informed, and is free out there for anyone like me who are working professionals, and they can tap into those resources. There is also Bounce Back Ontario programs that require a family physician's referral, but it's something that is very helpful during those low points or those tough days, just to have someone to talk to that you can confidently share, what are your challenges, and just pull you through those difficult days. There's also many health apps, such as My Hot Life apps, which has been a very useful tool for me to connect with other caregivers who are also caring for individuals with heart conditions. So I would say those are just few, and there is many more useful resources on the Ontario Caregiver Organization website as well. So always go back and check out there what's available. And I would say, as for the day-to-day logistic, I rely on technology and mobile apps a lot to help me multitask. So for example, I can request a prescription review for my father using an app from my pharmacy on my phone while I'm, walking down the corridor to my next work meetings in the office or during my break. And then, this would then help set things up and save me time, and then pick up his medication on my way home from the office, right? So I think there's also a lot of different mobile apps that can really help with just day-to-day logistic. I would say the last thing that I want other caregiver to take away from listening to this, in addition being a co-creator of solution, be a change agent.
Mhm.
You as caregiver, we know best what we need. We know what the problems are and what is missing in our caregiving and patient journey. So we are best positioned to work with our overloaded healthcare teams and trusted organization like OCO to co-create tangible solutions. It could be baby step, a tiny little pamphlets in different language and culturally relevant information to start off with. It could be a small webinars like what I did with OCO in February, or a tiny little cards like this. But I think there is just so many opportunities that we can contribute incrementally over time. So I would say reach out to all these trusted parties and explore how you can be part of the solutions is very important.
It really is. And remind us again how we can contact Find ACHD if we would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can contact us through email, findachd@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, also now known as X, at findachd.
Cindy, it's been really wonderful talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story and so much helpful information for other caregivers. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to share my story. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details and support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you've been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.